Hey guys, it's Jean-Claude. FFG just dropped the biggest news we could possibly receive one day before the release of their new set, Age of Ascension. Both Library Access and Bait and Switch got some huge nerfs. Library Access is now purged after you play it, so forget about playing it multiple times in the same turn. Bait and Switch basically functions the same, but you can only steal 2 Amber max. It's important to note that I have not seen any Age of Ascension spoilers, so hopefully the 2 holes that I feel were opened up by these changes will be filled by new cards. But I still wanted to take a moment to discuss my personal thoughts on these changes, and I'd appreciate if you keep an open mind as I take on a possibly controversial stance. These changes were unnecessary, simply because they really only affect the highest tiers of play. Why do I believe that? Anytime you went to your local card shop, you don't have to worry about an extremely overpowered lands deck running the tables. Those decks are reserved for the highest level of play, and I believe they're also an important part of the meta. It made people consider what their opponents might be doing against them, and it made artifact removal and control an important part of your deck selection process. Without lands, people can freely ignore most of what their opponent is doing and just simply play the fastest deck they own. It turns KeyForge into a simple game of aggro and aggro decks that have ways to deal with a few problematic creatures, things like Drumble and Vault Keeper. Vault Tours will become untamed nightmares for people that don't have insane Hunting Witch, Dust Pixie, Nature's Call type decks. When I hear people talk about how busted lands is, the first question I ask is, have you actually played against lands? Basically 80% plus of lands decks solely rely on the combo to win, and if you run into a player that is just willing to hold on to their artifact removal, forget about it. Players that spent a decent amount of time practicing against lands started to dismiss it for the most part before Vault Tour Denver. Hell, I know people that refused to play the lands deck they own simply because there was too much hate on day 1 and day 2, and they just simply couldn't risk playing it. They opted to play a deck that had a greater win percentage against both lands and a broader field. I've played against and watched many games where one player had their entire deck in their hand thanks to the combo, and the other player just outplayed the lands player and took home the W. Sure, lands can sometimes get lucky, but every deck can. All that being said, I think I could have been okay with the change to Library Access had they not done what they did to Bait and Switch. At the Vault Tour level, people have completely figured out how to play around, and in some cases make Bait and Switch one of the worst cards in your opponent's Shadow's house. When I'm playing against some of the better players and I happen to have Bait and Switch in my deck, I find myself discarding it about as often as I play it against the non-Amber Rush decks. In fact, most of the better players I know would rather have a card like Too Much to Protect in place of a Bait and Switch. When I know my opponent has it, I force them to make much worse plays throughout the game by playing around it, making them hold on to it, and effectively chaining them for several turns. Here's the deal though, at competitive levels, Bait and Switch had an important role. It was another card that could help keep the biggest Amber Rush decks under control simply because it made Amber Rush players play their decks differently. With Bait and Switch post-nerf, the fastest decks won't have to necessarily hold on to cards as much as they used to, because there were so many times where they were holding on to cards just to combo with a Key Charge or Chota Hazri. They are much more free to do as they please, no longer restricting their speed because no Bait and Switch will be there to help even out the Amber between the 2 players. And that's what helped non-rush players kind of try and keep up with keys. Now players will have to rely on cards like Doorstep to Heaven, Too Much to Protect, and Burn the Stockpile entirely too much. And that's a larger issue, because guess what? All those cards are uncommon. You will see them less frequently, and it will be harder to find an ultra-competitive deck that just so happens to have those cards. I think this is a big deal, and I expect Amber Rush decks to pretty much dominate the tournament scene with these changes. Overall, I'm a little disappointed with the changes. I feel like they were rushed. I think if there was more coverage at the highest levels, more players would have figured out how to better play against both Library Access and Bait and Switch. Because one of the best ways to learn is to watch others. I really hope these changes weren't made just to push players to go out and buy the new set, because my first impression tells me there's a chance. And if that is the reason, then who's to say this wouldn't happen again and again with each new set? Even with all that said, I still love KeyForge. I will adapt and I'll find new decks to play at the Vault Tours. I will continue to make videos for the game I love, and I'll continue to meet new friends as we go through this journey together. Thanks for hearing me ramble a little bit, and be sure to come back this Friday because we're going to be opening up our first Age of Ascension deck on the channel. I'll see you guys next time.